everyone. Today we are going to go through things all test optional. So we're just going to try to hit on what test optional is and really just the benefits of test optional and when you should still submit your tests anyways. Test optional is when you don't have to submit your SAT or ACT scores. And these two standardized tests are, pretty much required almost everywhere and have been for a while, but a lot of schools have started offering them as options. So here's the reasoning behind it. The University of Chicago actually, before COVID even started, they decided to go fully test optional, and they're one of the first and only T20 schools to do so. And the reason they did that is because standardized testing introduces an economic disparity and it highlights that disparity. People who can afford textbooks, who can afford to take the SAT test, who have been in places and schools where the SAT and ACT are talked about and taught, as well as those who can just afford, private tutors for these standardized tests, are generally just going to have a higher score. Most parts of the college application process are just easier when you have money, and that is a huge disparity when it comes to admitting students. And that's something that the University of Chicago really wanted to diminish and try to equal the playing field and set that balance. So that's actually the reason they went test optional, because there are many qualified candidates who don't have access or weren't given the knowledge about the SAT and could not afford textbooks, taking the test, or private tutors to really get a much higher score. And I know for U Chicago, that's been successful. Their rates of admitting students who couldn't afford to take the SAT and in general first generation and low income students has increased a lot at the university. They said by over 20%, which is absolutely amazing. Making college, especially top colleges, more accessible to everyone is, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And that's why I even have this entire channel, to make everything a free resource. So that was actually the original intention of test optional, and of course with COVID everything has kind of changed because a lot of people truly do not have the opportunity to take these tests in person given their timelines, which is a completely different matter. That's totally all right if you couldn't submit tests because of COVID. So keeping that in mind, let's look at the benefits of actually submitting your tests to a test optional school. The first benefit is that it just offsets a low GPA, and it's a great thing to submit when you think your application holistically, as a whole, is a bit lackluster, maybe you're not the most confident with your essays. When you don't submit your test score, every other part of your application is scrutinized even more. So if your GPA is already kind of low and you feel like your essays are lackluster, a high test score really shows them a positive educational blip, which would really benefit you in the long run. That could be the difference between getting into the school or not. So if you do think that your GPA is on the lower side, studying for, a month and trying to get your test score up is definitely worth it. And I wouldn't recommend going test optional because most of these test optional schools still have 80% of people who apply submit tests. You're still in the minority even if you don't submit tests to a test optional school. So in those cases, you want every part of your application to be perfect, and if it isn't, your test could be a boosting factor. The second benefit of submitting your test is just that it shows how much time and effort you put into something outside of your academics and outside of your extracurriculars. Yes, this is, an academic thing, but it wasn't required, and you went out of your way to do something for college to show them that you're the perfect candidate for them. And I think the fact that you're putting in so much effort into something that isn't required really does shine through in your application, because the amount of hours you would need to spend, to get something above a 30 out of 36 on your ACT or above a 1400 on your SAT is a lot of hours. You have to go through several practice tests and learn a lot about subject matter that you might not have heard of before. And I think that time and effort really does show through in your application. The third is that a lot of schools don't use the score score as the reason of admission, but it's almost like a baseline checklist of sorts. Like if the average score for a school is like a 1400 on the SAT, if you have something within the range of that 1400, like a 1350 to 1450, if you're in that range or higher, that's like almost just like a checklist. They're never going to think about you as not being able to academically handle the school. At that point, it's more about whether you're a good fit on campus. So that's where your essays come in. So just showing them that you have a baseline academic standing through your test scores and through a solid GPA just checks the list, and you move on to, yes, this candidate's qualified, now would they fit in? So I would really recommend, if you are someone who has the time, has the money to afford a couple of textbooks to self-study and take the SAT or ACT, I'd really recommend submitting to test optional colleges, because I truly think there are more pros than cons. But if this is going to be a financial impediment, if you don't have access to resources that you would require to study, to get to the venue and things like that, of course, you would not need to take any standardized test if you're applying to only test optional schools. But unfortunately, a lot of top schools still do require the SAT or ACT. So I really think self-study is key here. And I know it's also about the privilege of just knowing what you need to do to get to a better position to do well in this test. So it really depends on a lot of things. If you have an extremely low score, I would just recommend trying to study and take it again, because really, if you don't submit your score and everything else in your application is just baseline average, a high test score would really propel you in a good direction. But like I always say, I think college essays are the most important thing. So if you absolutely cannot submit any sort of test score, I would really recommend like focusing on your essays, because that's what they're gonna look at the most. Like they're gonna look through your academic transcript, your essays, and your extracurriculars a lot, and they're just going to spend more time scrutinizing that. So you would want to make sure those are as perfect as they can be. And lastly, just one more point. So there are a lot of scholarships and merit aid offered by schools based on your standardized test score. So if you don't take your standardized test, you won't qualify for applying to a lot of these scholarships and receiving merit aid. So that's just another thing you want to keep in mind. So that's it for this video. Hope I answered all your questions. If you have more questions, don't forget to comment them down below. And if you found any value in this video, smash that like button for that YouTube algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys at the next video.